Chapter 7, Interlude, Part 1, A Siege Gone Awry. The rhythmic thunder of the train wheels faded into the sound of war drums. Giovanni's voice, low and deliberate, became the chant of chroniclers long dead. Through his telling, the world of polished wood and sleeping passengers dissolved, replaced by a vision of banners whipping in a crimson dawn and of iron-clad men kneeling before tarnished relics. It was April of the year 1204, and the city of Constantinople, Queen of Cities, Jewel of the East, was burning. The Fourth Crusade was conceived in piety and born in compromise. It was to be a war for God, a pilgrimage to the Holy Land to free Jerusalem. Yet before it ever reached those sacred sands, its course had already begun to rot. The Venetians, masters of the sea and merchants of souls, had promised ships for the journey, galleys and transports enough to carry thousands across the Mediterranean. But when the time came, only a third of the expected host gathered in Venice, and their coin purses were light. The Doge, Enrico Dandolo, old and blind but keen as a blade, made his offer. The debt could be forgiven if the Crusaders lent their swords to a Venetian cause. Thus did the army of Christ first turn its arms not upon Jerusalem, but upon fellow Christians. The city of Zara, loyal to the King of Hungary and protected by papal decree, was besieged and taken. It was a conquest steeped in shame, a sin excused by necessity, or so they told themselves. And yet it was only the beginning. In the smouldering aftermath of Zara, envoys arrived bearing promises. Alexius Angelos, an exiled prince of Constantinople, sought to reclaim the throne stolen by his uncle, Emperor Alexius III. He offered gold, soldiers, and allegiance to Rome if the Crusaders would restore him. His words found sympathetic ears, not least those of Boniface of Montferrat, the new leader of the Frankish host, and the Doge of Venice, who scented both profit and power in the venture. Thus, the pilgrims became mercenaries, their holy banner shadowed by ambition. The fleet set sail, its crosses painted on blood-red sails, and came at last to the walls of the greatest city on earth. Constantinople sprawled before them like a mirage, the golden domes of Hagia Sophia blazing in the sun, the Theodosian walls stretching unbroken to the sea, and the masts of the Byzantine fleet like a forest of iron trees upon the water. It was a city not built for war, but for eternity. On the 5th of July, 1203, the Crusaders made their first assault. The Venetians drove their ships against the harbour walls, while Frankish knights thundered at the land gates. For days the air was filled with the drone of prayer and the hiss of fire. The Byzantines answered with Greek fire, liquid flame that rolled across the water and clung to flesh. The Crusaders reeled back, chastened but unbroken. Then on the 17th they struck again. Under a rain of arrows, the Venetians scaled the sea walls, their banners bearing the winged lion of St. Mark. To the north, Frankish knights battered the land gates with iron and faith alike. By sunset, the defenders faltered. Emperor Alexius III, fearing capture, fled into exile. The city's gates opened, and the Crusaders' prince, now Alexius IV, entered his inheritance upon the shoulders of foreigners. For a brief and fragile moment, it seemed the city had been spared. The young emperor, golden-haired and grateful, swore allegiance to Rome and promised to pay the armies who had restored him. But Constantinople's coffers were dry, its people bitter. The Byzantines loathed the Latin interlopers who camped in their churches and demanded treasure from their priests. Wronged and angered, the Crusaders left the city to its own devices and started making their way to Jerusalem. Riots spread like fever with Constantinople, and within months the alliance had rotted through. Among the prince's advisors was a man named Murtzouphlos, cunning and patient. He saw the storm gathering and chose his side. One night he imprisoned Alexius IV, strangled him in his sleep, and took the throne for himself as Alexius V. The murder broke the last fragile peace. The Crusaders, already desperate for gold, saw in this betrayal both outrage and opportunity, returning to the city. Murtzouphlos sent a fire ship into the Venetian fleet, and though it failed, the insult was unforgivable. The leaders of the crusade met in council and agreed to seize Constantinople outright. They drew up a plan to divide the spoils, to crown their own emperor and pay their debts with the wealth of the East. Even their prostitutes, the chroniclers note, were sent away by ship, a gesture of chastity before the slaughter. The devil's Simulare whispers of 5 souls whose faith and fury lit the walls of Constantinople: Gilles de la Grave, Eloise, Brother David, Renaud, and Martinus. All were staunch allies of one of the Crusade's leaders, Balduin of Flanders. The siege of the Queen of Cities was their crucible. Their story starts on the morning Constantinople fell. That morning, the sea lay choked with ships. Venetian galleys, bound together into floating towers, scraped their sides raw against one another as they pressed toward the sea walls. Hides steamed where Greek fire rolled down from the parapets. The air was salt, smoke, and human shouting. Then the horns sounded, and the world narrowed to the rhythm of iron on stone. The first man over the battlements was a Venetian. He vanished beneath Byzantine blades before his cry had finished. Sir Andrew de Reboise followed, dragging a banner through blood. Sir Gutmaris fought beside him like a man possessed, each stroke buying an arm's length of wall. Below, the Crusaders swarmed the postern gate, hacking at its timbers with axes and picks. When a narrow crack gave way, a cleric, Aliamues of Clary, hurled himself through, heedless of restraint. He struck like a hammer of faith, scattering the defenders long enough for 70 men to pour in behind him. The breach widened. Sir Peter of Amiens bellowed for the nearest gate to come down, and his words became law in the roar of victory. Eloise stumbled through the shattered entrance with Brother David at her side, smoke tangled in her throat. A Greek spearman thrust from the haze, her step slipped, her balance lost, until Peter's sword swept in a flash of white steel and sent the man's head spinning. "Come on, Eloise, you can do better than that." His laughter was fierce and fleeting. She answered with a grim smile, drew a dagger from her sleeve and cut, shallow but enough to taste blood. The counterstroke would have skewered her had Brother David not caught her by the shoulder and shoved her clear. His mace fell a heartbeat later, folding the attacker's skull as if God himself had pressed down. A prayer trembled in his mouth, half blessing, half command, before the din swallowed it. Beyond the smoke, the long drum of hooves broke the siege's rhythm. The gate was open. Mounted Crusaders thundered through the breach, streaming into the city with the sound of judgment. Gilles de la Grave rode among them, a lean knight from the mountains of Languedoc, face like weathered stone, his father's unfulfilled vow burning behind his eyes. He had sworn to bring relics home to his Cathar kin, to succeed where the old man had failed. He loosed a crossbow bolt that toppled a defender from a tower, then drew steel and pressed forward, thinking only that holiness was never given, only taken. Renaud's horse ran close beside Gilles. A lifetime of war had left the older man stitched with scars and stripped of illusion. Discipline was his creed now, obedience his salvation. "Hold the line." "Dress ranks," he shouted, voice raw in the smoke. Men obeyed out of habit, and habit kept them alive. When one fell, Renaud's hands, those of a soldier and a medic both, dragged him clear before the next charge. Then the lance came down again, and Renaud drove on, expressionless. Martinus followed, fair-haired, too young for the weight he carried. A lock of his betrothed's hair was braided into his horse's mane. His uncle's death at Zara rode behind his eyes. He whispered a prayer, then spurred into the melee. His lance impaled 3 Greeks before splintering. The impact wrenched his shoulder, but he tore the weapon free and swung his sword with a farmer's strength, fighting beside Renaud and Gilles until the square ran red. Around them, Constantinople screamed. Houses burned, priests were cut down at their own altars. Men prayed as they looted and sang as they sinned. Eloise and Brother David fought through alleys and markets, blades and maces wet, their faces ash-grey in the firelight. Somewhere above, bells tolled, or perhaps it was only metal striking metal. The cry rose that Emperor Alexius V's camp had broken at the Pantopoptes monastery. The mounted knights wheeled toward the hill, and the five found themselves drawn upward through the smoke, Gilles, Renaud, and Martinus on horseback, Eloise and David running in their wake. In the monastery forecourt, they met the eunuch guard, tall men with curved scimitars and eyes like cold iron. The first blow came down, Eloise ducked, the pommel clipped her brow, and blood veiled one eye. She slid aside, seeking an opening. Martinus severed an arm cleanly, Renaud's stroke took a head. Brother David crushed a body inward with a single swing. Gilles' sword turned an enemy aside from Martinus and bit deep into another's flank. When the last guard fell, the monastery was silent, but for their breathing. Inside, incense clung to the air. A shout, a crash of steel, and then the young emperor died beneath Peter of Amiens' blade. The city outside still burned, but in that chamber victory felt small, fragile, a silence more terrible than battle. Night followed, thick with wine, smoke, and unholy laughter. The Crusaders devoured Constantinople like starving men. Renaud drank little and watched. Martinus prayed between songs. Eloise wrote by candlelight in her native Italian. Brother David walked the lanes, counting blasphemies under his breath. Gilles stared at a looted icon and wondered briefly whether God lived in gold, and if so, what relics might be worth his silence. And somewhere aboard a train, over half a millennia later, an Italian priest turned another page of the devil's Simulare. Morning dragged itself across the city. Constantinople smoked, her domes blackened, her saints veiled in soot. The air still tasted of salt and blood. The gulls screamed as though mocking the dead. In the courtyards of the Blaternai, Crusaders slept among stolen silks and spilled wine. A messenger, young and grey-eyed, found the five amid the wreckage. "Count Baldwin requests your presence," he said coldly, "now alone." They followed him through the palace gates. Within, marble floors were streaked with mud. Holy icons hung askew, their gold leaf marred by blood and grease. The corridors were strangely empty. Renaud frowned. Baldwin never went without his brother Henry, nor without guards. Could it be? A secret meeting. To be summoned in secrecy meant danger of a different kind. The chamber at the top of the tower was small, its windows shrouded. Baldwin of Flanders stood by the table, hands clasped behind his back. His mail was unbuckled, his sword unbelted, yet his eyes were those of a man still at war. When the door closed, he turned to them with something almost like relief. "Friends," he said, and for a moment his voice softened. "Brothers." "Sister." He embraced them in turn, even Eloise, who bowed rather than curtsied, unsure how to receive a prince's arm. Then Baldwin began to pace. The candlelight trembled on the walls. "I have seen what we became last night," he said. "My men, God's men, drunk on sin, their mouths red with theft and worse. This is no triumph. This is corruption." He paused, eyes moving from one face to the next. "Something stirs among us. Something Venetian." The name hung like a blight. "There is a cabal of heretics," Baldwin went on, lowering his voice. "Merchants of blasphemy. I have heard whispers that they use foul magic. Perhaps that is why our victory tastes of ash. I will not have my crusade turn to the devil's work." The five exchanged uneasy glances. Martinus crossed himself. Brother David merely inclined his head, his jaw tightening at the word magic. Gilles said nothing. Eloise's eyes flicked toward the prince's trembling hands. "You will destroy what you can find," Baldwin said. "Burn their relics, root them out, and what you cannot destroy, bring to me. My own occult advisor will guide you in these matters. Brother Merovac, a leper who serves aboard his ship the Pestis. He is learned in hidden things. You will consult him before acting." "Your Highness," Renaud said quietly, "forgive me." "Why us?" Baldwin smiled thinly. "Because I trust you to be discreet. Because the Venetians are still our allies, and I cannot make open war upon them while their ships guard our seas. This must be a secret hunt. Only you five will know." He turned back to the window. Outside, the dawn bled across the roofs like an open wound. "There was also a message at first light," he said. A Venetian priest, Father Agostino, was captured by our men near the Forum of Theodosius. Some say he almost came willingly. He spoke of the Cabal, of their leader's search for some artifact, a suit of ceramic armor. He is being held under guard in the basilica there. You may wish to begin with him, or with Brother Merovac. The choice is yours. His hand clenched on the sill. And one more thing, he murmured. There are reports of a creature in the streets, a beast born of fire. If it is the devil's doing, end it. If it is only rumor, end the fear. He faced them again, and for the first time they saw the weariness beneath the zeal. Go, he said, may God watch you, though I begin to doubt he watches any of us. They descended the stairs in silence. The city groaned beneath them, screams, bells, the crackle of new fires. Renaud broke the hush first. He keeps this from his own brother, he said. That tells us the knife is close. Closer than that, Eloise murmured. A secret in Baldwin's house is a secret in ours. We tread between crusade and heresy now. Gilles glanced toward the harbor, where masts pierced the morning haze. Then let's meet the leper who knows too much, he said. If this Brother Merovac traffics in darkness, I'd rather face it in daylight. Brother David's lips twitched. Daylight will not help you there, he said softly, but perhaps faith will. Faith or something like it. They turned their steps toward the water where the Pestis waited, a black silhouette against the pale, corrupted dawn. The harbor at Petrion stank of rot and oil. Morning light struck the water in long, trembling shafts, but no warmth touched the Pestis. The ship drifted at anchor, its sails darkened, its hull banded with tar, and no movement on its deck save the slow turning of gulls. When Gilles and Brother David arrived, the oarsmen who had ferried them hung back, their faces pale as chalk. No man of Constantinople will row closer, one muttered, crossing himself. That ship carries death. Then we'll carry it the rest of the way, Gilles said, seizing the oar himself. The wood was slick with dew, the current nudged them onward. As they neared the vessel, the stench thickened, incense and infection. The sides of the hull were scarred with strange runes, carved deep into the timbers and filled with black pitch. A cracked bell hung from the foremast, swaying without sound. Two figures in iron masks waited at the gangplank. Their eyes were dark behind the slits, their hands, wrapped in oiled rags, held rusted halberds. State your names, one croaked. Gilles de la Grave, sworn man of Count Baldwin, said the knight, and Brother David of Orval, come by order of the Count. The guards exchanged a glance. Somewhere deep in the ship, a bell tolled once, low and hollow, like a heart beaten only by memory. The masked men stepped aside. Inside, the world narrowed to wood, shadow, and disease. The planks oozed pitch. The air quivered with the faint buzz of flies. Shapes moved in the dark. Lepers crouched in silence, their sores bandaged in grey. None looked up as the visitors passed. The whisper of feet on boards echoed like water dripping in a tomb. "Do not touch anything," David murmured. His voice was thin but steady. At the end of the corridor, a figure waited beneath a hanging lamp. He was wrapped head to foot in a black hooded robe, and yet even through the cloth they could see the marks of decay. Flesh sloughed from his lips as he smiled. His hands were gloved, but the fingers beneath twitched with stiffness. When he spoke, his voice was calm, almost gentle. "Welcome," he said. "I have been expecting you." Brother Merovac moved like a spider across his web. The lepers shrank from his path as he led them into the aft cabin. Here the air was worse, sweet with myrrh and rot. Books lay open on a table, their pages swollen with damp. Strange tools hung from hooks, knives, censers, vials of quicksilver. "So Baldwin sends new confessors," Merovac said. "Tell me, do you come to judge or to learn?" "Both," said Gilles. "We seek the truth of the Venetian cabal." The leper's teeth gleamed wetly behind torn lips. "Then listen well." He drew a line on the table with one blackened finger. "The ones you hunt call themselves the cult of the unburdened flesh. Venetians, yes, but their faith is older than any republic. They worship a god without skin, the skinless one. They believe that by shedding the body, they may free the soul. Fools." David's eyes narrowed. "And you, brother, how do you know these things?" Merovac laughed softly. The sound was like the cracking of dried meat. "Because I have seen the signs. The cult stirs because of a name whispered through Constantinople, Sedefkar, a Seljuk sorcerer, mad and magnificent. Both the cult and Sedefkar seek the relic called the Simulare, a suit of blue-tinged ceramic armor older than Christendom. With it, the wearer may steal any face, any body, provided he holds a fragment of his victim's flesh. To the eye, he becomes that man entire. Only at an angle, when truth glances sideways, can the deception be seen." Gila's stomach turned. Even David looked pale. "Where can we find them?" the monk asked. Merovac set the candle down. "You cannot. They will find you once you draw near their prize." He leaned closer. "And when you see Sedefkar, should you be so cursed, burn his flesh and bring me what survives. The Simulare must not remain whole. I fear the mad Turk might already possess it. If it does, we will all wear death masks before the end." For a long moment, no one spoke. Then David inclined his head. "We will do what must be done." Merovac smiled again, slow and carnal. A strip of flesh slipped from his jaw and dropped soundlessly to the deck. "Then go quickly," he said, "unless you wish to catch the leprosy of revelation." As they turned to leave, a bell tolled once more, louder, closer. The lepers vanished below deck like frightened birds. Gilas and David crossed back into the daylight, blinking. The rowboat waited, rocking on the oily water. Behind them, the Pestis seemed to sink deeper into its own shadow. David muttered a prayer as he took the oars. "God preserve us from such truths." They rowed toward shore, where Eloise, Renaud, and Martinez waited among the smoke. Behind them, the Pestis rang its bell again. The five met again on the quay, the smoke of burning houses rising behind them like incense for a false god. Gilas and Brother David came ashore still pale from the Pestis' shadow. Eloise, Renaud, and Martinez waited among the toppled statues. "What did the leper say?" Renaud asked. "Enough to make prayer taste of iron," Gilles answered. They moved together through the ruined streets, horses picking their way between corpses and broken icons. Everywhere the Crusaders' victory curdled, children keening beside their dead, women dragged through the smoke, looters staggering under chalices. No one looked twice at Baldwin's chosen five. The light of holiness had gone out in all of them. By noon they reached a cistern. Marble columns rose from the earth, a moor into the precious subterranean water tanks of Constantinople. The air was cool and wet, the ground slick. It was then they saw him, a Frankish knight, a Varangian guard's hand clamped about his throat. The Viking dragged him backward toward the dark mouth of the cistern. The knight's lips formed a silent help. Gilas lifted his crossbow without thought and fired. The bolt struck the Varangian through the neck. The man fell without sound, axes clattering. For a heartbeat, the street was still. Then the roar came, harsh voices in a northern tongue, and a dozen more Varangians poured from the stair like a released tide. "Ambush," Renaud barked, drawing his sword. Steel crashed against shields. Gilas reloaded and shot again, his second bolt punching through a mouth mid-shout. Martinez caught the charge of another, his kite shield smashing the man's face before his sword split him breast to groin. Renaud fought beside him, each stroke an executioner's measure, his eyes hard as glass. Eloise circled wide through the pillars, daggers drawn, moving like a wraith. She sprang onto one Varangian's back and drove steel into his shoulder. He bellowed and spun, flinging her off. She rolled across the wet stones and shouted, "David!" But Brother David was not at her side. He crouched behind the entrance of the cistern, sweating, his lips shaping Latin that curdled as it left him. The prayer slipped, syllables twisting. His voice dropped to a pitch that was not wholly his own. The air thickened, the stones beneath them shivered. Something answered. A low snarl rose from the depths, followed by a tremor that sent dust raining from the ceiling of the entrance. The Varangians nearest the stair froze. One screamed in his own tongue, "Tita Ola, de Aaron Drake, Spring Fi Fan," and fled. Fire bloomed after him. The beast came up through the cistern mouth in a wash of steam and flame. Its scales gleamed bronze black, its eyes molten gold, and from its flank jutted the head of a broken lance that shimmered like sunlight trapped in water. Smoke boiled from its nostrils. Martinus saw the weapon and gasped. "St. George's spear!" The drake roared, heat slammed into them. Renaud mounted without thinking, spurring his horse into a wide arc. Martinus ducked beneath the dragon's first sweep, his shield taking the blow that would have shattered his spine and thrust upward into its belly. His lance bit shallowly. The beast recoiled, slashing the air with claws the size of sickles. Eloise darted forward, reaching for the golden lance. The drake's paw missed her by inches, tearing her hood. She felt the heat singe her hair, but kept her grip, trying to wrench the weapon free. "Now!" Renaud shouted, lowering his lance and charging. The point drove through one of the creature's foreclaws. Black blood hissed on the stones. Gilles loosed another bolt that buried itself in the drake's eye. The beast screamed, a sound that seemed to twist the world around it. Brother David emerged from the smoke, his mace raised high. He swung at the creature's leg, missed, and barely ducked the sweeping tail. The dragon drew breath again, its chest glowed red. Fire erupted, washing across the square. Renaud's horse reared, its tail barely aflame. Eloise tugged once more and freed the spear. Black blood spattered her arms. "Martinus!" she cried, hurling it to him. He caught it by instinct, the relic blazing in his hands. He whispered a prayer and drove it into the wound left by the broken shaft. The spearhead vanished. The drake convulsed, shrieking. Renaud saw his chance. He vaulted onto his horse again, spurred hard, and leapt. For one blinding moment, man and mount crashed onto the dragon's back. His sword rose high, fell once, twice, carving deep into the neck. The beast writhed, bucking. Renaud was thrown like a rag doll against a marble pillar. Something cracked in his back, and he slid to the ground, unconscious. Brother David charged forward, roaring a single wordless psalm, and slammed his mace into the drake's paw. Bone splintered, flame gushed from its mouth in pain. Eloise, bloodied but unbowed, ran up the creature's side, using her dagger's hilt as a handhold. She clung to its scales, climbed toward its neck, and drove her blade between the plates of its skull. The creature's cry became a keening wind. The dragon filled its lungs again, but the breath caught. Fire flared inward. Its chest glowed white, then burst into collapsing embers. It stumbled, tried to rise, and fell upon itself, crushing the stones with a final shuddering exhale. The air reeked of sulfur and holy oil. Silence followed. Eloise ran to Renaud, who was half collapsed against a column, his back twisted at a wrong angle. She pressed her fingers along his spine until something clicked, and he groaned back to breath. "Alive," she said softly. Gilles stared at the spear embedded in the dragon's corpse before Martinus retrieved it. "A saint's weapon," he murmured. They looked around. Already people were gathering. Ragged priests, trembling soldiers, children peering from doorways. 2 Frankish clerics knelt and crossed themselves. "Glory to thee," one whispered, "a miracle. But beware, a sorcerer conjured the beast. They caught him near here. He is still alive, or was." The 5 followed the priests to a nearby square, where a man hung suspended by his feet, his body blackened by flame. His beard pointed upward like a frozen flame. When David touched him, the corpse was still warm. Black ichor oozed from his mouth, and from within that darkness glimmered a single dragon scale. "He was bound to it," David said quietly, "bound by spell and sin." Renaud drew his dagger and cut the head free, tying it to his belt by the hair. The face, frozen in shock, swung with each step. "Then let us find the priest," he said, "before the next monster wears a man's skin." They turned toward the heart of the city, where the Forum of Theodosius waited among the ruins, and the smell of burning faith followed them like a blessing gone bad. And somewhere aboard a train over half a millennia later, a Belgian private eye and an American maid looked at each other, a glimmer of awe in their eyes. The basilica on the Forum of Theodosius stood half broken, its dome cracked like an egg. Around it, the square was littered with fallen icons. The mosaics of saints had been stripped for gold. A handful of Frankish soldiers lingered near the doors, their eyes dulled by sleeplessness. They straightened when the five approached. "You're Baldwin's people," one said, relief in his voice. "Good. You'll take this madness off our hands." He pointed toward a cage set against the basilica wall. Inside crouched a man in torn vestments, his face half hidden by blood-soaked bandages. One hand clutched a rosary, the other, trembling, held the linen straps. When the torchlight caught him, he raised his head, revealing the form of a bloodied eye socket under the dressing. "Father Agostino," Renaud said. The priest nodded weakly. "You know my name," he rasped. "Then you know why I begged your count for shelter. The cult hunts me still." They stepped closer. The guards backed away. "Tell us what happened," Gilles said. Agostino's remaining eye flicked toward him, fever bright. "A Venetian knight named Ramadi ordered us to scour the city for an artifact. Armor of ceramic, pale as bone. I searched the church of St. Mochius on the 7th hill and found no armor, only a chest hidden by Byzantine monks. Inside were fragments of a ritual, Latin mixed with something older, describing how the pieces of a statue could fuse, how flesh and clay might become one. I hid it beneath a statue of the Virgin. I thought the mother would guard it." His voice faltered. "But the cult found me. They plucked out my eye to make me talk. But I said nothing. I thought they would kill me, but the Franks came. Now I can barely tell friends from enemy." Martinez crossed himself. Eloise crouched, her voice gentle. "The cult are Venetians. We are not." Agostino shook his head, lips trembling. "Please, come closer. I am so weak." Renaud hesitated, then stepped forward, lowering his guard. The priest's fingers slipped from his bandage. Beneath it, the empty socket pulsed with a faint inner light, and a voice, not his own, spoke through him, low and terrible. "I see you." The words struck like a hammer in the skull. Agostino's good eye bulged, then burst. A gout of pus and black fluid sprayed across Renaud's chest as the priest convulsed. The head folded in on itself, bones cracking, flesh sinking inward. The five staggered back. Brother David whispered a prayer. Gilles' hand went to his sword. Martinez turned away, retching. Eloise stood frozen, her face pale, watching the last breath flutter from the ruin that had been a man. When silence returned, only the crackle of candles filled the air. The priest lay still, his face half collapsed, mouth open in a grin of pain. Renaud wiped the pus from his armor with slow, deliberate movements. "He's gone," Gilles said. Outside, the bells of Constantinople tolled. The sound rolled over the ruined quarter like thunder. For a moment, all five looked toward the light that poured through the cracked dome, grey, polluted, and cold. Renaud straightened. "We've seen enough," he said. "Let's leave this place." They stepped out into the daylight. The city sprawled before them, smoke curling from every street. Somewhere beyond the hills, the sea glimmered like a blade. Eloise drew her cloak tight, her voice barely a whisper. "St. Mochius, that's where the priest hid his ritual. That's where we'll go next." Gilles nodded. "And after that?" David looked back at the basilica's shattered doors. "After that," he said, "we find the armor,